Pakistan's proposed two-phase deal just changed everything. Stop whatever you are doing right now, because in the next 20 minutes, I am going to tell you about something that could reshape the entire Middle East, end one of the most dangerous standoffs in modern history, and put one country at the center of global diplomacy that most Western analysts never saw coming. That country is Pakistan. Yes. You heard that right. While the world was watching missiles fly and oil prices explode, while Washington was in emergency sessions and Tehran was digging in its heels, a quiet, confident, and extraordinarily bold diplomatic move was being prepared in Islamabad. A two-phase peace deal, a framework so carefully constructed that it addresses every major concern, from nuclear weapons to frozen bank assets to the single most important waterway for global oil supply. They are calling it the Islamabad Accord. And if it works, this could be Pakistan's greatest moment on the world stage. Ever. So stay with me, because this story is just getting started. To understand why Pakistan's proposal is so significant, we first need to understand the crisis it is trying to solve. For the past several weeks, tensions between the United States and Iran have reached a boiling point. We are talking about a level of confrontation not seen in years. Naval vessels are shadowing each other in the Persian Gulf. Diplomatic channels have gone completely cold. Iran has made increasingly aggressive statements about its nuclear program. And the entire world has been holding its breath, waiting for one miscalculation, one wrong move, one moment of madness that could trigger something nobody can control. But here is where it gets truly dangerous for every single person on this planet, not just people in the Middle East, not just Americans or Iranians, but for you, for your family, for your country, wherever you are watching this from. The Strait of Hormuz. For those who do not know, and this is absolutely critical to understand, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water sitting between Iran and Oman. It is, without any exaggeration, the jugular vein of the global economy. Nearly 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through this strait every single day. Every time you fill up your car, every time a factory runs its machines, every time a cargo ship delivers goods to your country, there is a very real chance that oil came through the Strait of Hormuz. When Iran threatened to close that strait, even partially, even temporarily, oil markets went into immediate panic. Prices shot up overnight. Shipping insurance costs tripled. Countries that depend on Gulf oil started making emergency calls to their allies. Stock markets trembled. Ordinary people in dozens of countries started feeling the pressure at the pump, in their grocery bills, in every corner of their daily lives. The world needed a solution. It needed a mediator. Someone trusted by both sides. Someone with Islamic credibility to speak to Tehran. Someone with strategic relationships in Washington. Someone with nothing to gain from war and everything to gain from peace. And that someone turned out to be Pakistan. Now, some people watching this might ask, why Pakistan? Why not Turkey? Why not China? Why not the United Nations? And it is a completely fair question. But the answer reveals something remarkable about Pakistan's unique position in the world. A position that has been quietly built over decades and that the world is only now beginning to fully appreciate. First, Pakistan is a Muslim-majority nation with deep historical, cultural, and religious ties to Iran. These are not just diplomatic relationships written on paper. These are centuries-old connections rooted in shared faith, shared history, shared poetry, and shared civilization. Pakistan understands Iranian psychology, Iranian concerns, and Iranian red lines in a way that Washington simply cannot replicate, no matter how many think tanks it funds or how many experts it employs. Second, Pakistan has functioning relationships with the United States. Despite the complexities of their history, despite all the tensions and disagreements over the past 2 decades, Pakistan remains a country that American officials pick up the phone for. Pakistan has intelligence sharing arrangements, military-to-military ties, and a long history of back-channel communication with Washington that goes back generations. Third, and this is perhaps the most important point of all, Pakistan has absolutely no hidden agenda here. Pakistan does not want Iranian oil fields. Pakistan is not competing for regional dominance. Pakistan does not have a proxy war to protect or a sectarian rivalry to advance. Pakistan genuinely, sincerely needs this region to be stable because an unstable Middle East means more refugee pressure, more energy price shocks, more economic strain on Pakistani businesses and Pakistani families. Pakistan's motivation is pure, and both sides in this conflict know it. Fourth, Pakistan already has experience in this exact kind of role. Pakistan helped open back-channel communications between the United States and China in the 1970s, a move that literally changed global geopolitics forever. Pakistan has facilitated Taliban negotiations. Pakistan has served as a quiet intermediary in Gulf disputes. This is not Pakistan's first time in this position. This is a country that has been building the skills, the relationships, and the credibility for this moment across multiple generations of diplomats and leaders. So what exactly is Pakistan proposing? Let me break this down for you clearly, carefully, and completely, because the details here matter enormously. The proposal is a two-phase deal. And the genius of this structure is that it separates the urgent from the comprehensive. It gives both sides a quick, visible, tangible win first, and then builds the trust and momentum needed before asking for the harder, more painful compromises. This is not naive idealism. This is sophisticated, experienced diplomatic engineering. Phase 1 is the immediate phase. It has two components that are simple to state, but world-changing in their implications. The first component is an immediate ceasefire. All hostile actions stop. Naval provocations cease. Inflammatory public statements are paused. Both sides take a breath and create space for real negotiation to happen. This is not a permanent peace, not yet. It is a pause. A moment of enforced calm that allows negotiators to do their work without the constant background pressure of potential escalation. And this matters enormously because in high-stakes confrontations like this one, accidents happen. A misread radar signal, a trigger-happy commander acting without orders, a drone that drifts 2 kilometers off course. Any one of these could spark a conflict that nobody wanted and nobody planned. The ceasefire removes that danger immediately. The second component of Phase 1 is even more dramatic. The Strait of Hormuz reopens immediately. The moment Phase 1 is agreed upon, the strait is declared open for international shipping. No harassment, no blockade threats, no mysterious interference with tankers. Ships move freely, oil flows, markets stabilize. The global economy exhales. Why is it so important to do this in Phase 1 before the comprehensive deal is even negotiated? Because it immediately stabilizes global oil markets and sends a clear, powerful signal to the entire world that something is actually working. It gives both Iran and the United States something they can point to as an early, concrete victory. Iran can say to its people, "We stood firm and the world came to the table." The United States can say to its allies, "The pressure is working and diplomacy is advancing." And both sides gain the goodwill, the breathing room, and the political cover needed to tackle the much harder issues that come in Phase 2. Pakistan understands something that pure hardliners on both sides consistently fail to grasp. Peace needs momentum. You cannot ask bitter enemies to solve 50 years of grievances on the very first day of negotiations. You give them a small win, then a bigger win. You build a pattern of agreement, a habit of cooperation, and then the truly comprehensive solution becomes not just possible, but almost inevitable. This is sophisticated, psychologically intelligent diplomacy, and it is coming from Islamabad. Phase 1 buys time and builds trust. But Phase 2, the Islamabad Accord itself, this is where history is actually made. Pakistan's framework envisions that within 15 to 20 days of the ceasefire taking hold, negotiating teams would sit down, potentially in Islamabad itself, to hammer out a final comprehensive peace deal. A deal that addresses the root causes of the Iran-US confrontation, not just the surface symptoms that have been flaring up for decades. On the Iranian side, Iran would agree to limits on its nuclear program. Specifically, a clear and verifiable commitment that its nuclear activities will not be directed toward building nuclear weapons. This is the American non-negotiable. This is what Washington has demanded for over 2 decades. And Pakistan's proposal acknowledges that reality with clear eyes. Iran cannot realistically expect sanctions relief, cannot expect frozen assets returned, cannot expect to be welcomed back into the international community while simultaneously moving toward a nuclear bomb. That is simply not a deal that any American president can sell to the Congress, to the American public, or to American allies in the region and beyond. But here is where Pakistan's diplomatic brilliance truly shines through. Rather than framing Iran's nuclear commitment as Iran surrendering, as Iran being forced to back down in humiliation, the Islamabad Accord framework frames it as Iran making a sovereign, dignified, and strategically wise choice for the benefit of its own people and for the broader stability of the region. The language matters. The framing matters. How you package a concession determines whether the other side can accept it without losing face domestically. And Pakistan understands how to speak to Iranian national pride without triggering Iranian defiance. That is a skill that very few countries in the world currently possess. In return for Iran's nuclear commitments, the West would offer 3 major concessions that collectively represent a genuine, historic shift in the relationship. The first concession is sanctions relief. The crippling economic sanctions that have strangled the Iranian economy for years, sanctions that have affected ordinary Iranian citizens, Iranian doctors, Iranian students, Iranian farmers, far more than they have ever affected the Iranian leadership. These sanctions would begin to be lifted in a structured, phased, verifiable way. This is what the Iranian people desperately need and desperately want. And this is what gives the Iranian government the domestic political cover and the popular support to make the concessions that peace requires. The second concession is the release of frozen assets. Billions of dollars in Iranian money have been frozen in international banks and financial systems for decades. Under the Islamabad Accord framework, a structured process would begin to release these assets back to Iran. And I want to be clear about something here, because it is important. This is not charity. This is not a gift. This is Iran's own money. Money earned from Iran's own resources. Returning it is not weakness on the part of the West. It is a powerful and necessary act of good faith that signals a genuine willingness to move forward rather than backward. The third concession is perhaps the most forward-thinking, most visionary element of the entire proposal: a broader regional framework for Hormuz security. Rather than leaving the Strait of Hormuz as a permanent flashpoint, a place where every future crisis can instantly become a global emergency simply by one country threatening to close a narrow waterway, Pakistan's framework envisions a permanent multilateral security arrangement for the strait. An internationally recognized framework with clear rules, clear responsibilities, and clear consequences for violations. Iran gets a formal, respected role in protecting its own sovereign waters. The international community gets guaranteed rules-based access. And the world's oil supply gets a layer of institutional, legal, and diplomatic protection that it has frankly never had before in its entire history. Think about what that means for the long term. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz is essentially a loaded gun pointed at the global economy, with Iran's finger always near the trigger. Every time there is a crisis in the region, every time sanctions bite too hard, every time a diplomatic dispute escalates, the world holds its breath, wondering if the strait will be threatened again. Pakistan's framework would change that dynamic permanently. It would transform the Strait of Hormuz from a weapon into a protected international resource. That single element alone, if achieved, would be one of the most significant diplomatic accomplishments of the 21st century. Now, let me take a moment to talk about what all of this means specifically for Pakistan, because I genuinely believe this dimension of the story is being massively underreported, particularly in Western media, which has its own preferred narratives and its own blind spots. Pakistan, for much of the last 2 decades, has been discussed internationally almost exclusively in the context of terrorism, regional instability, economic difficulties, and its complicated relationship with Afghanistan and India. The international narrative around Pakistan has been largely, and I would argue profoundly, unfairly negative. Pakistan has been seen as a problem to be managed, a country to be monitored, a source of complications rather than solutions. But what this moment is revealing to the entire world is a completely different Pakistan. A Pakistan with serious diplomats who have spent their careers building the exact relationships that this crisis requires. A Pakistan with strategic thinkers who understand not just South Asian dynamics, but the full complexity of Middle Eastern politics, American foreign policy calculations, and the economics of global energy markets. A Pakistan with the patience to maintain difficult relationships over decades, knowing that those relationships might one day matter in exactly this kind of moment. This proposal did not emerge overnight. It did not come from a sudden inspiration in some government office in Islamabad. It came from years, decades even, of quietly maintaining trusted channels on all sides. It came from Pakistani diplomats who actually speak Farsi and understand Iranian culture from the inside. It came from Pakistani officials who have sat across from American counterparts in difficult conversations and built the kind of mutual respect that cannot be manufactured on short notice. It came from a country that has consistently, despite its own enormous challenges, chosen engagement over isolation, chosen conversation over confrontation. If the Islamabad Accord succeeds, even partially, it does something for Pakistan's international standing that years of lobbying, years of public relations campaigns, years of op-eds in Western newspapers could never achieve. It proves beyond argument, beyond debate, that Pakistan is not just a problem to be managed. Pakistan is a solution to be embraced, a partner to be valued, and a voice to be heard in the highest councils of global decision-making. Pakistan's leadership, Pakistan's foreign ministry, Pakistan's diplomatic corps, they deserve enormous credit simply for attempting this. In a world where most countries retreat into narrow self-interest during global crises, where most governments calculate what they can get rather than what they can contribute, Pakistan stepped forward and said, "We can help. We have the relationships. We have the credibility. We have the vision. Let us try." That is leadership. That is genuine, courageous, selfless leadership on the world stage, and it deserves to be recognized and celebrated. Now, I want to be completely honest with you because you deserve a full and balanced picture, not just the highlights reel. Is the Islamabad Accord guaranteed to succeed? No, of course not. Nothing in diplomacy is ever guaranteed, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. There are real obstacles, serious ones. Real hardliners exist on all sides of this conflict, and many of them benefit directly from ongoing tension. For them, peace is not an opportunity. It is a threat. Inside Iran, there are powerful factions who see nuclear capability as an existential matter of national survival, not merely a bargaining chip to be traded for sanctions relief. These factions have domestic political power, institutional influence, and they will fight hard against any deal that requires genuine nuclear limits. Inside the United States, there are political interests, including in Congress, in think tanks, in media, and among certain allied governments who have spent years building their entire worldview around the premise of Iranian untrustworthiness. For them, any deal with Iran is by definition a betrayal of principle. They will attack the Islamabad Accord as naive, as dangerous, as rewarding bad behavior. And their voices are loud and well-funded. There are also regional actors, certain Gulf states, for example, who have calculated that a permanently weakened, isolated Iran serves their strategic interests. A diplomatically rehabilitated Iran, and Iran with its assets returned and its sanctions lifted and its nuclear program legitimized within limits, does not fit their preferred regional balance of power. These actors will apply significant pressure quietly but effectively against the success of Pakistan's initiative. The 15 to 20-day timeline for Phase 2 is also extremely ambitious, perhaps unrealistically so. Comprehensive nuclear agreements and sanctions frameworks of this complexity typically take months, sometimes years, to negotiate in full detail. The Iran nuclear deal of 2015, for comparison, took nearly 2 years of intense negotiations to finalize. Pakistan's framework may need to be significantly more flexible on timing than the initial proposal suggests, accepting that Phase 2 might itself have multiple subphases extending over a longer period. And Pakistan itself is not operating from a position of unlimited strength. Pakistan faces its own domestic economic pressures, its own political complexities, its own competing demands on its diplomatic bandwidth. Sustaining the kind of intensive, high-level diplomatic engagement that a process like this requires is not easy for any country, and it is particularly challenging for a country managing as many simultaneous pressures as Pakistan currently is. But here's what I want to say clearly and without any hesitation about all of these challenges. Doing nothing was never a real option. The alternative to a difficult, risky, imperfect peace process was not a comfortable status quo. The alternative was continued escalation. The alternative was, potentially, an actual military conflict between the United States and Iran. A conflict that would have sent oil prices to levels that would devastate economies across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. A conflict that would have destabilized not just Iran and the Gulf, but the entire broader Middle East. A conflict that could have cost hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of lives, and created a refugee crisis that would have made everything that came before look manageable by comparison. Pakistan looked at that alternative and said no. Pakistan chose to try. And trying, even imperfectly, even knowing the odds, even knowing the critics will be waiting with their analysis if anything goes wrong, is always, always better than standing aside and watching the world burn. So how's the world actually reacting to Pakistan's proposal? Early signals are cautiously, carefully encouraging. Diplomatic sources indicate that neither Tehran nor Washington has rejected the framework outright. And in high-stakes international diplomacy, that silence, that absence of rejection, is often the critical first step toward genuine engagement. When a proposal is truly dead on arrival, governments say so quickly and publicly. The fact that neither side has done that speaks volumes. China, which has enormous and direct economic interests in Iranian oil and in Gulf stability more broadly, is believed to be quietly supportive of the Islamabad Accord framework. Beijing has been using its own channels to encourage Tehran and relevant regional actors to give Pakistan's initiative a genuine and serious chance. This Chinese support matters because Beijing has its own trusted relationships in Tehran and its endorsement carries real weight. Turkey, which has itself played mediator roles in various regional conflicts over the years, has signaled solidarity with Pakistan's diplomatic effort. Within the broader Muslim world, there is a sense of genuine pride that it is an Islamic nation, a South Asian nation, a country that the Western foreign policy establishment has so often underestimated, that is stepping up to solve a crisis that the great powers have failed to resolve across multiple administrations spanning decades. The United Nations has not made official public comment, but multiple Security Council members have privately indicated real openness to supporting a Pakistan-facilitated framework if both Iran and the United States demonstrate genuine engagement with the process. The next hours and days are absolutely critical. Back-channel communications are reportedly ongoing right now between Islamabad, Tehran, and Washington. If both sides agree even in principle to Phase 1, to the ceasefire and the opening of Hormuz, the entire dynamic of this crisis shifts instantly and dramatically. The narrative changes from escalation to negotiation. The pressure comes off the oil markets. The world starts looking at the situation with cautious hope rather than genuine fear. And then, 15 to 20 days later, if the process holds, the world will watch to see whether negotiators gathering in Islamabad can accomplish what seemed completely impossible just weeks ago. Let me leave you with this final thought, because I think it is the most important one of everything I have said today. History does not always remember the biggest armies or the richest economies. History does not always give its most important chapters to the most powerful nations or the loudest voices. Sometimes history remembers the peacemakers, the quiet, determined, courageous voices that refuse to accept war as inevitable. The diplomats who stayed up through the night, draft after draft, finding the precise words that both sides could live with, that both sides could take home and defend to their own people. The countries that chose the harder, braver path of dialogue when the easier, more popular path was simply to point fingers and walk away. Pakistan is trying to be that voice right now. A country of 240 million people, a country with its own challenges, its own economic struggles, its own internal complexities and political battles. But also a country with extraordinary wisdom accumulated over centuries of civilization. A country with relationships built patiently across decades of careful diplomacy. A country with the moral courage to stand in the gap between two nuclear-capable powers and say, we have a better idea. We have a framework. We have a path forward. Give us the chance to show you. The Islamabad Accord may succeed completely and change the course of history in the most dramatic way possible. It may partially succeed and plant seeds that grow into something more comprehensive over the coming years. It may face setbacks and require renegotiation and additional rounds of painstaking diplomacy before it reaches its final form. That is the reality of how peace is actually made in the real world. It is rarely clean, rarely quick, and rarely guaranteed. But what Pakistan has already demonstrated, simply by proposing this framework, simply by having the vision to see a path where others saw only a wall, simply by having the courage to step forward when stepping forward meant taking on enormous risk and responsibility, is that this nation has a role to play on the world stage that goes far, far beyond what the headlines have typically suggested. Pakistan is not a footnote in this story. Pakistan is not a supporting character in someone else's narrative. Pakistan is writing this story. Pakistan is sitting at the center of one of the most consequential diplomatic moments of our generation. And the entire world is watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please share this video with everyone you know, because this is exactly the kind of story that deserves to be heard, discussed, and understood. Hit subscribe for more deep analysis on global events that matter. And drop a comment below right now. Do you think the Islamabad Accord can work? Do you think Pakistan can pull this off? I genuinely want to know what you think. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and always remember that peace is worth every difficult conversation, every sleepless night, and every ounce of courage it takes to pursue it.